Type 2 diabetes is a metabolic disorder that causes sugar, in the form of glucose, to accumulate in the blood rather than being used as fuel by the cells in our body. When we eat, food is broken down by our digestive system into nutrient molecules that are then absorbed through our digestive tract for use by the body. Foods containing carbohydrates or various sugars are broken down into glucose. Glucose is an important source of fuel for many organs in our body. However, to be able to use the glucose for fuel, the glucose molecule must first enter into the cell. The pancreas produces a hormone called insulin, a chemical messenger essential for the entry of glucose into cells. As the blood glucose levels rise after a meal, insulin is released into the bloodstream and sets processes in motion to trigger the removal of glucose from the blood to enter into the cells.
Insulin. Here's a muscle cell. Here's some blood sugar outside waiting patiently to come in. Insulin is the key that unlocks the door to let sugar in our blood enter the muscle cell. When insulin attaches to the insulin receptor, it activates an enzyme, which activates another enzyme, which activates two more enzymes, which finally activates glucose transport, which acts as a gateway for glucose to enter the cell. So insulin is the key that unlocks the door into our muscle cells. What if there was no insulin, though? Well, blood sugar would be stuck out in the bloodstream, banging on the door to our muscles, and not be able to get inside, and so with nowhere to go, sugar levels would rise and rise. That's what happens in type 1 diabetes. The cells in the pancreas that make insulin get destroyed, and without insulin, sugar in the blood can't get out of the blood into the muscles, and blood sugar rises. But there's a second way we could end up with high blood sugar. What if there's enough insulin, but the insulin doesn't work? The key is there, but something's gummed up the lock. This is called insulin resistance. Our muscle cells become resistant to the effect of insulin. What's gumming up the door locks in our muscle cells, preventing insulin from letting sugar in? Fat. What's called intramyocellular lipid, fat inside our muscle cells. Fat in the bloodstream can build up inside the muscle cell, creating toxic fatty breakdown products and free radicals that can block the signaling pathway process. So no matter how much insulin we have out in our blood, it's not able to open the glucose gates, and blood sugar levels build up in the blood. This mechanism by which fat induces insulin resistance wasn't known until fancy MRI techniques were developed to see what was happening inside people's muscles as fat was infused into their bloodstream. That's how we found out that elevation of fat levels in the blood causes insulin resistance by the inhibition of glucose transport into the muscles. And this can happen within 3 hours. One hit of fat can start causing insulin resistance, inhibiting glucose uptake after just 160 minutes. Same thing happens to teens. You infuse fat into their bloodstream, it builds up in their muscles and decreases their insulin sensitivity, showing that increased fat in the blood is an important contributor of insulin resistance. And then you can do the opposite experiment. Lower the level of fat in people's blood, and the insulin resistance comes right down. Clear the fat out of the blood, and you can clear the sugar out of the blood. So that explains this finding. On a high-fat, ketogenic diet, insulin doesn't work very well. Our bodies become insulin resistant. But as the amount of fat in our diet gets lower and lower, insulin works better and better. This is a clear demonstration that the sugar tolerance of even healthy individuals can be impaired by administering a low-carb, high-fat diet, but we can decrease insulin resistance by decreasing fat intake.
In type 2 diabetes, the cells become resistant to insulin and ignore its message to absorb glucose. This is known as insulin resistance. In addition, in type 2 diabetes, the pancreas is unable to produce the greater amounts of insulin needed to trigger these resistant cells to take in glucose from the bloodstream.
When glucose can't get into cells, either because there isn't enough insulin or because the body is resisting it, glucose begins to build up in the bloodstream. As a result, all that energy is wasted. It does not get to cells where it is needed. Without glucose in your cells, they lack the energy they require to keep your body working.
The most notable symptom of diabetes is frequent urination and excessive thirst. Other symptoms include weakness, drowsiness, and blurred vision. These are caused by chemical imbalances in the blood related to high levels of blood glucose. About 1 in 4 people with type 2 diabetes are unaware that they have the disease. It is important to catch diabetes early. Over time, high blood glucose damages the blood vessels, which can damage the organs that these vessels supply, leading to a variety of health complications. Damage to the small or micro blood vessels can cause vision problems, including loss of sight, nerve damage, and kidney disease. Damage to larger or macro blood vessels can lead to cardiovascular complications such as heart disease, stroke, and poor blood circulation. Overweight and inactivity are major causes of diabetes. A family history of diabetes significantly increases your risk of developing the disease. Certain ethnic populations are also at increased risk of developing type 2 diabetes. Finally,